over 30,000 innocent men, women, and children killed. Over 1 million people displaced from their homes. An entire country suffering from starvation. And yet, the Israeli government continues to wage war, nay, the genocide in Gaza and on Palestinians. Why is the Israeli government continuing to do so? And why is the free world, the leaders of the free world, the so-called champions of human rights, continuing to look the other way and in fact are supporting the excesses of the Israeli government? Why does the world watch silently as millions of people are being erased from humanity? Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the Inflection Point. I'm your host Fahad Sayed, and in this episode, we will be exploring these and many more questions. Joining me today is Ambassador Iqbal Ahmed Khan, a career diplomat with over 40 years of experience serving at key missions in Jeddah, UAE, Yemen, and also being ambassador to Iran. So please welcome Iqbal Ahmed Khan. So firstly, thank you very much for sparing time for us. And this is a very important issue, and we are very honored to have somebody with your experience guiding us and informing us in what you think what is going to happen. So let's, before we go into the thick of it, let's just try to historically contextualize the Israel-Palestine issue. If you can briefly discuss the historical context of it.
So the Palestinian issue goes back actually centuries, but that is, we don't have the time and neither the energy to go through all this. But as far as the recent issue is concerned, you start off with the First World War. And in the First World War, you find that there is a nexus between imperialism, colonialism, and Zionism. What do I mean by that? During the First World War, the British colonialists, they were with the French on one side in the First World War, and opposing them was Germany and the Ottoman Empire. In other words, the Turkish Empire was on the other side. So what the Britishers did was to promise the Arabs that if you rise up against the Ottomans, we will, after the war, give you your lands and give you independence. Now, at the same time, what else did they do? The British Foreign Secretary Balfour wrote a letter to the Zionist banker Rothschild. And in that letter, he said that the British government will view favorably the creation of a Zionist or the state of Israel in Palestine.
Right.
Now, how could you reconcile the two? If after the war you were supposed to give independence to the Arabs in Palestine, how come you are also giving the state of implanting the state of Israel there? That was one thing. The second thing was that there was also the Sykes-Picot Pact. The Sykes-Picot Pact, I won't go into all the details of the pact, but this was another effort on the part of the colonialists to stab the Arabs in the back. Now, after the First World War, instead of giving them independence, naturally in the First World War, the Germans and the Ottomans lost. So instead of giving the Arabs independence, they came up with this unique system of mandates.
Right.
A mandate meant that people in those territories which were given as mandates were not mature enough to govern themselves, or at least that was in the eyes of the imperialist or the colonialist. So therefore, they took over those territories and said, Whenever these people are mature, we will then give them independence.
Right.
To cut a long story short, the Palestine mandate was given to the British. And now the British kept their promise with Lord Rothschild. And from 1920 to 1948, over 1 million Jews, migrants came from Europe and settled in Palestine.
Right.
And in 1948, the British Empire and the British government had become exhausted. They wanted to divest themselves of their colonies, and therefore they shifted the Palestine issue to the United Nations. Now, at that time, the United Nations was not the same as today's United Nations. That was a creation of the victors of the Second World War. And therefore, in the United Nations, they passed a resolution creating the state of Israel. But also, along with the state of Israel, the other state, the state of Palestine. Now, rightly or wrongly, the Palestinians reject, and the Arabs also rejected this. They did not agree to the establishment of the two states in Palestine. And that is where the war of 1948 came in. And that 1948 is known as the infamous Nakba, which meant the catastrophe. The catastrophe was that during the war, the Israelis, backed by the Europeans, they were able to dispossess over 1 million Palestinians of their lands, of their homes, and the Palestinians left these and became refugees. Where did they go? Some went into Lebanon, others went into Syria, others went into the West Bank. Some went into Gaza, others went into Egypt. Imagine you were living there for centuries, your ancestors and all were the owners of this land. And then you find that you had been dispossessed, and that situation continues to this date. Now, that divide and rule policy of the colonialists was being practiced in the Middle East. It was being practiced right here in India, in British India too. So 48 Nakba, then again a war in 1956. In that war, again a collaboration between the former colonialists and the Zionists.
Right.
In other words, a collaboration between Israel, Britain, and France.
Right.
The three of them then protested Jamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt's nationalization of the Suez Canal. And they invaded Egypt.
Right.
In order to prevent this nationalization. At that time, the United States played a very positive and a constructive role. It was opposed to this plan of the Europeans and the Israelis.
So it was
And
interesting how
therefore,
it was the Europeans that were driving it, and the Americans were sort of playing the balancing act. Or
yeah,
yeah.
yes. The Europeans were opposed to the whole scheme. The scheme was a secret until it was implemented. So when the Americans came to know of this, so therefore they acted both in the international forums and bilaterally in order to ensure that this invasion was, they had captured, they had come to the Suez Canal and all, and that was evacuated. Thereafter, again, for the same reason, there you had the 1967 war between the Arabs and the Israelis. That war, the Israelis performed exceedingly well. In that war, it was a 6-day war, and they were able to capture the Sinai. They were able to capture the West Bank. They were able to capture parts of Lebanon and Gaza.
Yeah. And so
And those...
they pushed the Palestinians into these peripheral territories. Is that also...
Yes, yes. Every time the war was fought, the Israelis were able to occupy more territory. And from those territories, the original settlers, they were virtually forced to leave, and the Jews came and settled there. This was what it was. So by now, as well as the Golan Heights. So till now, the Golan Heights has been incorporated into Israel, which is obviously against international law. The West Bank is still under the control of the Israelis. The Gaza is a kind of autonomous, and the Sinai after the 1973 war was given to Egypt.
Right.
Now, in 1973 was the Third Arab-Israeli War. And that was the war where the Arabs surprised the Israelis. Surprised them to the extent that the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir came on television and she was crying that Israel is done. It is finished now. And Moshe Dayan, the defense minister of that time, he came with a plan to nuke Cairo and Damascus. That plan, fortunately, by that time, the Israelis had got the atom bomb.
Yeah.
Thanks to their collaboration with the Europeans and perhaps the Americans. Mm-hmm. So they had the nuclear bomb. Moshe Dayan said that this is the only way we can save Israel, is by using the nuclear bomb. Fortunately, the cabinet did not accept this, but then America undertook one of the, or perhaps the largest transfer of arms and ammunition in the history of mankind. And the United States transferred right onto the battlefield. Oh. Tanks, guns, jeeps, the latest aircraft and everything.
Right.
Not that the tide was turned. The Israelis were able to win one or two battles.
Despite the support from the Americans?
No, they were able to win because of the support of the Americans.
Okay.
There was a strong opinion. The Egyptian commander-in-chief, he was against stopping the war. He said, we can continue. It does not matter these small reverses that we have had.
Right.
But the Egyptian president, President Anwar al-Sadat, was not convinced.
Right.
And he felt that it was not possible for Egypt and for Syria to take on what he said were the Americans, because the Americans were now fully behind.
Yeah, they were supporting them. Yeah. Okay.
They were fully supporting them in the sense that this kind of an airlift had never taken place in history.
Yeah. Sir, I understand the importance of laying down the historical background to it. With the events of October 7 and the things that happened preceding that, if you could sort of shed light on those things.
So, what happened, they had got hold of Gaza then.
Yeah.
And Gaza continued in Israel's occupation till 2005. In 2005, the Israelis left Gaza.
Okay.
And they imposed a blockade on Gaza.
Right.
So from, I think, 2008 till now, there has been a perpetual blockade of Gaza.
Right.
And now, so in Gaza,
West Bank, during this period, what is happening in West Bank?
In the West Bank also, there is a semi-autonomous Palestinian government.
Okay.
Similarly, in Gaza, there were elections, and as a consequence of the elections, the Hamas came into power in Gaza.
Yeah.
So what happened now was yet another attempt by the Palestinians to throw off the Israeli yoke, because these territories are illegally occupied by Israel.
Yeah.
And so in the United Nations, whether it is the Security Council or it is the General Assembly, resolutions have been tabled, but ultimate for the Israel to evacuate all this. Israeli rejects all these resolutions. But when it comes to the Security Council, US is a permanent member, so are Britain and France, and they veto it.
Yeah.
So that is where we stand today. At this point in time, you had these on October the 7th, October the 8th, you had these Hamas incursions into Israel.
Yeah. And so,
and as a reaction to that, you have what Israel is now doing, which is regarded by most as genocide.
Yeah. Sir, we have heard statements from the Israeli leadership, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu and the leadership group around him, that they will continue this warfare till they uproot Hamas and all of these statements. They, despite the presence of Hamas, they continue to refer to them as a militant group. While I think it is very pertinent to note that they have the political legitimacy in that region. And there is this idea as well that Hamas continues to pose a political challenge, not just a military challenge, not just a security challenge to Israel. So, if you could just highlight two things: what is the end goal that Israel is fighting towards, and how much of a challenge, how much of a political challenge is Hamas uh, putting forward to them?
Israel will not tolerate the slightest of threat to its security. The slightest of threat to its security. For that reason, even though the whole international community is calling for the establishment of the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, Israel is hell-bent on not allowing the Palestinian independence.
Right.
They will allow them to have a certain amount of self-governance in the West Bank and in Gaza. But nowhere, no independence. No independence, no standing army, no means of defense whatsoever, keeping them surrounded in these territories and keeping them militarily extremely weak and totally unarmed and completely at the mercy of Israel.
Yeah. Sir, one of the things is that there is the pro-Israeli stance that is given by their supporters, is that this is basically a struggle against Hamas. And the thing is, the more attacks that they are conducting on civilian infrastructure, they've also bombed the airport within the Gaza Strip. Does that not lend more support to Hamas, and does that not create a greater political challenge for Israel in vis-a-vis Hamas?
No, Israel is hell-bent on finally using force in order to curb the Palestinians' aspirations. What are the Palestinians' aspirations? The aspirations of the Palestinians are to a statehood. And that is what not only the UN General Assembly, but also all other major, well-known, well-established international organizations have said.
Right.
That the Palestinians deserve a homeland of their own. After all, the Palestinians were in a majority in this area.
Sir, one of the things that has come up in this conversation is how the Americans have supported militarily and also at political platforms such as the UN, the Israeli cause and the Israeli political stance. We have also seen that they still continue to provide a lot of military aid to Israel even today. But I want to understand what are the strategic interests that Americans have with the Israel that they're trying to guard within this region. Is it their hegemony that they have had for around a century that they want to protect by protecting Israel, or is it something else?
The United States, not only in the Middle East, but in all parts of the world, just like any other power, not
Yeah.
just this is not exclusive to the
Yeah.
United States. The United States would like to have friends who can promote their policies, their strategies, and their interest in the region. Whether it is Japan in the Far East,
Hmm.
whether it is India in South Asia, whether it is the Europeans in Europe
Yeah.
against the earlier the Soviet Union, Russia,
Now Russia.
and in the Middle East. In the Middle East, they feel that the staunchest ally will be should has been Israel,
Given their
and they have been, and no, they have been proven right.
yeah.
The Israelis have been able to withstand the might of the Arabs.
Hmm.
There are just 10 million is the population of Israel.
Yeah.
Israel's Israeli GDP is just 500 billion.
Hmm.
Israel's area is about, I think, 22,000 or so square miles.
Hmm.
And it is arrayed against the whole Arab world.
Yes.
Just let me give you one example, that of Egypt.
Hmm.
In case of Egypt's population is 10 times that of Israel.
Yeah.
It's 107 million.
Hmm.
Its GDP is more or less the same as Israel's.
Hmm.
Its area is dozen times more
Yeah.
than that
Much,
of
much
Israel.
more, much greater. Yeah.
It has much bigger armies also.
Yeah.
Just one.
Hmm.
I'm not including Syria, Jordan, other Arab countries.
Yeah. Uh,
And the American bet has been proven successful, proven right.
yeah.
They have bet on Israel. They have committed themselves to Israel. Israel is that most important military outpost in the Middle East.
Right.
And Israel has been able to withstand the whole Arab onslaught. 450 million Arabs
Hmm.
arrayed against 10 million Israelis.
Yeah.
And even in those 10 million, 25% are Arabs.
Yes. But sir, there is also this idea that, within the US as well, we know that US is now heading towards their presidential elections later this year. And there is this pressure that is mounting on the US government as well, the Democrats, to take a sterner stance because there is, albeit small, but there is a civil society movement within the US as well, where they are opposing the genocide that is happening in Gaza. So, and we have seen that in the American elections, it's not just the domestic policies that have an impact on the polls, it's also their foreign policy. So, do you think that there is some sort of pressure that is building up with regards to the American elections on the current American administration to take a sterner stance to sort of, bring Israel to agree to what they want, or is it that the Americans are so far happy with how the Israel is progressing?
No, this time the situation has been different.
Yeah.
In the kind of reaction that has taken place in the European public
Yeah.
and the American public, or for that matter, the Canadian public, there is a stark difference as
Right.
compared to earlier years.
Yeah.
But this thing will not be translated into any significant change in US policy.
Okay.
In times of crisis, the United States will put its might behind Israel. Even now, there are, you are absolutely
Hmm.
right, this is a kind of a, not a sea change, but it is a distinct change in favor of the Arabs, or in favor of their being, not in favor of the Arabs, but in favor of there being a more just political order in the Middle East, whereby the people of Palestine, who were there in a majority in 1948 when Israel was created, and are now living in a kind of a very secluded and a very underprivileged existence in Gaza and in the West Bank, and more than nearly 2 million Palestinians living as refugees all over the world, or at least living outside their homeland.
Yeah. Sir, you brought this discussion towards the Arabs, and they continue to be a very important part of it. But we've also seen that in events prior to the October 7th onslaught, there was a flurry of establishment of diplomatic channels between Arab countries and the Israeli state. And this is not happening in the past few years. This has been going on for a few decades. One by one, slowly the Arab countries, they have been establishing their diplomatic relations with Israel. And we were seeing that United Arab Emirates has gone on to do that. Saudi Arabia has prior to these events, they have looked favorably towards developing diplomatic channels with Israel. What do you think is it just the economic reasons, or are there other strategic interests that the Arab countries now have in establishing relations with Israel?
No, I think it is a very realistic appreciation of the situation. As for the Arabs are concerned, in the situation in 1974, when, for example, the OIC summit was held in Lahore. In 1974, the OIC summit, and there was complete unanimity in the Muslim world, leave alone the Arab world. Complete unanimity in the Muslim world how to tackle the issue of Palestine. All you need to do is to read the joint communique which came out of the 1974 Islamic Summit, which was held in Lahore under the chairmanship of Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And you will find the whole, the Arab world, the Muslim world stood united in 1974 February. And this was subsequent to the October 1973 war against Israel, in which the Arabs did wonderfully well.
Sir, one of the things that we have sort of seen is that there is, you also said that there is now a realistic appreciation by the Arab countries in establishing relations with Israel. One key player within the Middle East is also Iran, a country that you're very well familiar with. So I want to understand it, because I was attending a session at the Lahore Literary Festival, and there was a session on the Israel-Palestine issue. And one of the things that the speaker was saying was that the Arab countries also want to develop a strong relations with Israel, as a way that in case there is any confrontation with Iran in the future, they can sort of rely on Israel. Do you think that there is some strategic link over there, or is this extremely far-fetched thought?
No, this is the misfortune of the Muslim world, that it lies divided. And as far as certain Arab countries are concerned, they are extremely suspicious of Iran. They are suspicious of Iran because of Iran's hold in Iraq, because of the closeness of Iran with Syria, because of the Hezbollah, because also of Hamas. They feel that these are forces that perhaps might not be kindly disposed to a certain branch or a certain group of the Arabs. And therefore, they are inclined to have some kind of an understanding or rapprochement with Israel. With the result that now you have Egypt, Jordan, Bahrain, UAE, all these countries, Sudan, all these countries have now established diplomatic relations with Israel.
There is also this fear, a worry that, as this conflict continues, there could be a possibility that the entire region could be sucked into a greater conflict. Do you think that there is a chance that we would see a heightened violence throughout the region, or do you think that this issue will be over before it becomes more of a regional war?
I don't think presently in the short term there is a chance of a general conflagration in the Middle East. And the reason for that is, and I think some statements remarked sometimes ago, some statesman remarked some time ago, and perhaps it was Dr. Henry Kissinger, that without Egypt, you cannot have a war in the Middle East. And without Syria, you cannot have peace. So he's probably been proven right that without Egypt, since Egypt is the most powerful Middle Eastern nation, Arab country, you cannot have a war. But now what has happened to Syria, I think the chances that you can have peace are very much there. And in many, many Arab capitals, they are not sure. They are not sure whether they need to be afraid of Israel or they need to be more afraid of Iran. And that is why there is this problem and there is this serious split in the Arab world as far as the question of Palestine is concerned. So therefore, I don't think so there will be a wider conflagration. There will continue to be things like what has happened in Gaza. But what is really concerning is the way that Israel has reacted. That it is, according to many, tantamount to a genocide, what it is committing in Gaza. Just imagine the number of people that they have killed. And the majority of these people are women and children. And there are probably hundreds who still lie buried
that we do not know
under the rubble which they have bombed. These are the kind of things that is extremely worrisome. They have completely leveled Gaza. Where are those people going to live? There are famine conditions in Gaza, and therefore, I think the reference to the ICJ regarding genocide by Israel is very, very pertinent.
Right. Sir, we've always seen that, there is this idea of, in the aftermath of World War II, we saw a liberal world order that came into being, which there was this idea of internationalization of various institutions and certain human rights that were to be upheld. But then we see time and time again the realpolitik angle continues to capture the imagination, continues to capture the minds of the policymakers. What do you think is going to be the end game or the day after, once this conflict, once this violence dies down eventually?
This violence is not going to die down in the near future. The reason for this is very obvious. We had the United Nations. There were a lot of wishes, and there were which were people had with the United Nations, but unfortunately, the exercise of the veto has enabled many an aggressive nation to continue on their path of aggression, with the result that the rules-based order has been completely eroded.
Yeah.
In the United Nations now, every time the vast majority in the Security Council, which is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, the vast majority are for Israel to accept excessiveness in Palestine, and also the creation of the state of Palestine. Despite that, the veto is exercised,
Yeah.
and Israel is protected by its benefactors. So this kind of an order is not going to promote any tranquility, any peace, anything, such thing in the world.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that, don't you think that the whole idea of veto, because it came in the genesis of UN when it came up in the aftermath of the World War II, it reeks of imperialism, it reeks of inequality, because there is this idea that certain nations have a better say or they have a greater say in the international affairs. So don't you think that while we understand that this is the reality, do you believe that in order to restore a rule-based order, there is a need to rethink the infrastructure within which UN functions?
The UN has been there for now nearly 75 years or even more than 75 years. And the principal purpose of the UN is obviously the maintenance of international peace and order. That, when you look at what is happening, what the Israelis are doing in Gaza, that purpose has obviously not been achieved so far.
Mm.
But if you take away the veto powers and say no country will have a veto power, and all decisions which are taken either in the Security Council or in the General Assembly will be by a simple majority.
Mm.
So it won't be possible at all, even if a decision is taken, that you decide that what Israel has done in Gaza is tantamount to genocide, and that these sanctions need to be established, need to be imposed on Israel. That, unfortunately, will not be possible unless and until that verdict has the backing of powerful countries in the world.
Right.
And when we say that they must have the backing of these countries in the world,
They'll
that
never back it.
means those countries must have a veto.
Yeah.
They won't back it, one, and therefore the veto power has been
Yeah.
given to these 5 countries. And they were the victors of the Second World War: Britain, France, the United States, the Soviet Union, and now Russia. And they were the victors, and therefore they have the veto power. We've not been we've not been able to come up with a efficacious alternate system, unfortunately.
Yeah. Coming back closer to home, we have seen that in the years uh, gone by, the Pakistani government or the Pakistani establishment, they've always released very firm statements and stance in support of Palestine. But in this time around, despite the international world's hue and outcry about it, the ruling leadership within Pakistan, they have had a relatively softer stance on Israel. Why do you think that is? And do you believe that something else could be done by Pakistan given its economic constraints?
Unfortunately, Pakistan in its present state is unable to play a very effective role in foreign affairs.
Yeah.
For the simple reason that Pakistan does not wield the clout that it has the potential to do so. Pakistan was able to do so in 1973-74.
Yeah.
In 1973, Pakistan sent its air force, it sends its soldiers to the Middle East to back the Arabs against the war against Israel. And thereafter, we held diplomatically, we held in February 1974, the highly successful Islamic Summit. Yeah. And that summit clearly showed a united Muslim world. Now the situation is much, much different. The reason for that, one, that economically we are in a very bad shape.
Yeah.
Two, that politically we are not stable. Three, we are entirely, or not entirely, we are to a very great extent dependent on Western assistance,
right.
The IMF program.
Right.
So without these, if you are not going to fulfill these conditions, then I am afraid Pakistan is not in a position to play any role which is anywhere close to what it had done in the early 70s.
We've gone into detail about its impact on Palestinians, the people, their plight, and also the impact it has had on the region. Just final thoughts as to what you believe is going to happen in about, let's say, 6 to 8 months or to a year. How do you think this is going to pan out?
Well, it is extremely difficult to make prophecies, but Israel has the upper hand today.
Okay.
Israel's aim in Gaza now would be to completely demilitarize, or in fact even to ensure that there is nobody living in a strip of Gaza which is close to the Israeli border. They will ensure that first. Obviously, that means uprooting thousands and thousands of Palestinians. Where will these Palestinians go? Is anybody's guess. As far as they are concerned, they want to push them into Egypt, just as they have pushed over 1 million Palestinians into either Lebanon, into Syria, into far-off lands, as far as they are concerned. Right. So I am afraid that the future is extremely grim. And Israel in this part of the world does have an upper hand.
Right.
And Israel is fully backed by the Western countries and the United States.
Right. And do you believe that their onslaught that is continuing right now, do you believe that they can successfully uproot Hamas as a political and a military entity? Or do you believe Hamas will have the capabilities and the resilience to somehow, maybe not within Israel, but maintain its positions outside in the surrounding regions?
Hamas has been seriously injured.
Okay. Right.
Seriously injured. The Israelis are in occupation now of Gaza, and the resistance that is coming, naturally, it comes from Hamas. That resistance is now negligible.
Okay.
So Hamas has been, to a very great extent, has become, I won't use the word toothless, but many of the infrastructure that it had built up, the resources that it had been able to garner, those resources and the infrastructure has been destroyed to a very great extent. And that will take a long, long time to be able to be back to what it was prior to October the 7th.
Right. Thank you, sir, once again for sparing the time for us and enlightening us with your views on this matter. While it doesn't seem so right now, but that's the only thing we can do, is to hope for a brighter future for the people of Palestine, for the Gazans that are living there, because they obviously are the primary targets as of now. Thank you, folks, for joining us today. If you like the show, please give your feedback in the comment section below. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Paradigm Shift Pakistan. For now, goodbye and Allah Hafiz.